I want to thank the Chamber of Commerce for coordinating today's event, and I look forward to next year's luncheon. It is now my pleasure to introduce our featured speaker. Andrew Young has spent more than 35 years in public service. After graduating from Howard University and Hartford Theological Seminary, he pastored small congregational churches in the South, moved to New York to work for the National Council of Churches, then returned to Atlanta as a top aide to Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. He was elected to the U.S. Congress for 3 terms. In 1977, he resigned his seat to become U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations under President Jimmy Carter. He was elected mayor of Atlanta in 1981 and re-elected for his 2nd term in 1985. After serving these terms, he joined Law Companies Group, Inc., a global recognized engineering and environmentally consulting company. In October 1990, he was appointed chairman and CEO of its subsidiary, Law International, Inc. He's played a major role in the development of Atlanta's international recognition, and most recently has been instrumental in bringing the 1996 Summer Olympic Games to Atlanta. Everyone, please join me in welcoming Ambassador Mayor Andy Young.
Thank you very much, and it really and truly is a pleasure to have an opportunity to share with such a distinguished audience as this. I have many very, very pleasant memories of Jacksonville, and really, I think as a part of the family of law engineering, I have been less and less concerned about jurisdictional lines, city limits, state boundaries, and I've been able to see that whenever any of us grow, all of us grow. Of course, I learned that from my daughters when I was mayor of Atlanta, and they would always shop in Cobb or Gwinnett County, and it didn't make any difference to them that I didn't collect any taxes out there. But the truth of it is, our citizens worked there, and as that economy grew, our city economy grew, and I think that's also the message for us in the southeastern United States of America, that this is one of the areas of our planet that is going to shape the future of the planet on which we live. And the sooner we begin to think in those long-range terms, the better off we're going to be. Now, I go way back with Jacksonville. 38 years ago, or 37 years ago, my wife and I spent our first wedding anniversary down here on Fernandina Beach. And there was nothing there. There wasn't much here. And yet, that was a blessed occasion that we will never forget. Being able to walk for miles on the beach in the moonlight with nobody around and didn't see anybody. I came back about 10 years later to a little town of St. Augustine, and I had an unpleasant memory turn into a pleasant memory. I got beat up down there by the sheriff and the Klan and put in jail, but I came here to Jacksonville to the court case, and a young lawyer by the name of Earl Johnson defended me. And a very, very courageous judge by the name of Brian Simpson decided the case. And I'll never forget that, because Brian Simpson simply gave us the right to walk in peace. And because we were able to walk in peace and protest without violence in 1964, I think we helped to get a civil rights bill passed by the Congress of the United States, and we were able to solve the problems of this region with a minimum, with almost no violence. I got picked on worse in football games. In fact, playing basketball on a city court, you can get beaten up just about as bad as I got beat up by the Klan and the police force, so it wasn't no great thing. But it changed the world in which we live. Had we not had good lawyers like Earl Johnson and courageous judges like Brian Simpson, we wouldn't be here today. And we wouldn't look like we look. There's no place on the face of this earth where people who represent such diverse background and tradition have been able to come together and live together in such peace and prosperity and harmony. Look at Yugoslavia. They're all white. Only slight differences. They speak the same language. Look at the Soviet Union. Look at the Middle East, where not just the Israelis and the Arabs, look at the different kinds of Arabs that are not getting along. People are not getting along. And they're not getting along in some measure because of the tight economy and because of the difficult times in which we live. But they're also not getting along because there's no system of law which guarantees justice, as did our system and as has our system throughout the years of our existence as a nation. And we are in the forefront of that human rights movement. And we sometimes have to come, being dragged, kicking and screaming. But still, because of what happened here, I think very clearly Jimmy Carter, learning from the mistakes of the past, made human rights a part of our nation's foreign policy. And when I was in East Germany for law engineering a few weeks ago, the people who were now the government in East Germany are all former Lutheran pastors and church workers, because the only people who really had the courage and freedom to stand up against communism were the people in the churches. But I'm saying that we are shaping the world. Jimmy Carter's from right up the road a piece, and it was his experience in dealing with the complex problems of race and poverty in rural Georgia that made him more sensitive to what was going on in the world than any president of the United States had really been before that time. We are right now preparing for the 1996 Olympic Games. And I'm clearly convinced that one of the reasons why we are receiving the Olympic Games for 1996 was the diversity that made up our team. That when we went out into the world to sell Atlanta, we were black and white, we were Hispanic and Asian, we were male and female, we were working together because we believed in something bigger than ourselves. And that really impressed everybody in the world. We sold the Olympics as an introduction to the American South. And we see the 1996 Olympic Games as really presenting the American South to the world. Now, believe it or not, nobody much knows about Jacksonville around the world. Nobody much knew about Atlanta around the world. We finally talk about the South and we say, Gone with the Wind, and they, oh yeah. And you didn't want to, I finally said to some of our Japanese friends, you thinking about us like Gone with the Wind is about like us thinking about you as Shogun. And we're a long way from that. But nobody knows us. Nobody knows who we are. The world is going to meet the American South in 1996 because 80% of the world's population will be wired into the Olympic Games. And 80% of the world's population for 3 weeks will focus on our region. I see this as the marketing opportunity of the century. And it's not just for Atlanta. It's for Jacksonville. We couldn't have won. One of the things we did, we guaranteed all the athletes that come to the Olympics a free trip to Disneyland, or Disney World rather. And clearly they want to see this part of the world. Now, let me go back, because We were a long time getting there, and it wasn't easy. I was saying to your mayor that he asked how things were going. I said, about like they are here, and that is, things are better than they've ever been before, better than anybody ever thought they would be 20 years ago, and still nobody appreciates it and everybody's complaining. But that's life. And I'm reminded of the first mayor that really decided to make Atlanta international, and that was Mayor Hartsfield. Mayor Hartsfield bought the land for our airport for $90,000. He did another ambitious, courageous thing. He put up red lights. And you know, he lost the next election. That was too way out. That was too visionary. But he was elected the next time, and he came back and kept on building. He built jet-length runways when there wasn't a terminal. We had a Quonset hut. Many of you remember the old Quonset hut terminal that was the Atlanta airport. Even when we had a Quonset hut, we had jet-length runways. And the reason we got Delta was that there was no place else that jets could land, and also he struck a public-private deal, which was very controversial. He gave Delta all the land they could use for 50 years for $1 a year. That was the original public-private partnership. But that was a forerunner of the way things go now. Back in those days, governments had money, but that money wasn't coming south. So those of us in the South who were trying to build economies had to learn to be creative and innovative, and Mayor Hartsfield certainly was. Well, in that tradition, I started talking about Atlanta as an international city. And you know, I caught more hell. I expected to catch hell about my civil rights background, about some of the things that I said at the UN or in Congress. Nobody ever paid any attention to that. They gave me hell about traveling. They ridiculed the fact that I said Atlanta was going to be the next great international city. Even people at the airlines. I mean, I can remember going into Delta and telling them we've got to have more international flights. And I got an hour-long lecture about why they were simply going to be a regionally based national airline. But the world has changed so rapidly since then. And the things that looked controversial 20 years ago, or even 10 years ago when I was first elected mayor, now look very, very good. Let me tell you what those things are very briefly. Clearly, it was the diversity. And I'm not putting your city of Miami down, but Miami should have had the World Cup. Miami was more entitled to get the World Cup than Atlanta was to get the Olympics. Miami is much better prepared as a base for world-class soccer than we were in terms of the Olympic Games. The difference was, when we went after the Olympic Games, we had Roberto Goizueta, who was Hispanic. We had R.K. Siegel, chairman of law engineering, who was born in India. We had the Masters golf course and the St. Patrick's Day parade, which gave us a line to Ireland. We had an affirmative action program in our city that required the Atlanta Ballet to have minority dances. And in going out of their way to look for minority dancers, they ended up with a Philippine dancer who ended up, once she got on the ballet, being the prima ballerina of the ballet. And everybody that came saw somebody from their part of the world. We have a little Polish community behind Georgia Tech. It's doing extremely well. That when the Polish delegates came, they went to, the Polish citizens of Atlanta came out and invited them and told them they not only wanted them to come back to the Olympics, but they wanted them to bring the parents of Olympic athletes to stay in their homes, to cement this link between Atlanta and Poland. It was our ethnic diversity. By contrast, when Miami went after the World Cup, they went with 5 white men. Only the decision-making team of the World Cup is black and Hispanic and European. And if they had just taken along some of their friends, lack of appreciation of diversity right now costs money. And if we're going to really market in the world, we've got to remember that the world is made up of all of the people in this room. If everybody was honest, and most of you can't be, and admitted the ethnic background of both of your grandparents, I mean all four of your grandparents in your family, and we added up all of the countries represented in this room, I would be willing to bet my life that there'd be more than 100 countries in the world represented in this room today. That's a market advantage, a marketing advantage that the Japanese or the Europeans can't compete with. Because the market of the future, I mean, there isn't going to be but so much between Europe and Japan. Their markets are saturated, our markets are saturated. They're not, I don't care what kind of cars or computers or whatever they design, they can't sell us any more cameras and computers and stuff. We can't sell them much more. When the U.S. economy flattened out last year, we ended up nevertheless having our best year ever because we had an international division taking up the slack. And then this year, the international division, for the first time, is doing better than law engineering or law environmental. It's not that we're that smart. That's the way the world market is going. And we just happen to be out there where the growth of the market is taking place. Now, you're at the heart of you're the growth center of the American economy. It is the Southeast. We have the experience, the struggles that we've had learning to live together, the difficulties that we've had make us better prepared to give leadership in the world than almost any other part of the nation. You know, you look at the difference between Atlanta and Los Angeles, they got almost everything we've got more. But they didn't hire black folk. Black folk in Los Angeles don't have any businesses. Koreans could come in and get loans, and blacks who lived there for 20 years couldn't get loans. They went out there to work for the aircraft industry and for the shipyards during the Second World War, so they're not unskilled and uneducated. In a time of war, they did very well. But they didn't build up a small business network. There were no black entrepreneurs that were training and employing black people because there was no affirmative action effort by the city or by the state of California. And they end up having more people in prison, and the rate of prison growth is much more rapid than the rate of job and education growth. Now, that just is not good sense business-wise. It costs you $25,000 a year to put somebody in jail. You can send them to college for $10,000 a year. And if you send them to college, in fact, for $25,000 in the Georgia system or the California system, you can give a young person 4 years of college level or technical education. It takes you that much to keep them in jail for a year. We've got to develop a society that educates people and that gives them jobs. And the key to that is everybody having access to capital. And one of the things that we worried about, and we used to worry about in Atlanta, was that with all of these black contractors coming in here and all of these black folk getting all this work, it was going to take work from everybody else. Law engineering is not a minority company. And I'm sure law engineering was hurt in the early days by minority contractors taking some of the growth that normally automatically would go to law engineering. But law has gone from a $50 million company to a $300 million company in the last 5 years. So we ain't hurting so bad. The difference is And it's the difference between capitalism and the old communist worldview. That in the communist worldview, the pie was just so. And for the poor to get more, the rich had to get less. That's just not the way the world works. That's not the way capitalism works. And in a capitalist view of the world, the more people that come into the economy, the bigger the market gets. Yes, you might share the market. And law engineering has had to share our marketplace with many minority engineers that might not have been able to compete with us otherwise. But we're all getting more work. The pie has gotten so much bigger. I think in part also because of good race relations. We attracted over $70 billion worth of new investment and generated 500,000 new jobs during the term that I was mayor. And just the announcement of the Olympics did as much for us economically as any other city did in a year. And your report was very good. To have the kind of growth of jobs, to have the kind of participation and involvement in the business community that you have here now, and to get the kind of presence that you have in this economy is outstanding. But you ain't seen nothing yet. It's going to be bigger and better than that. Because in spite of the fact that there are all of these troubles, I think we're just on the verge of the awakening of the New South. Arnett Gerardo and I were classmates at Howard University. And if they had voted for the sorriest one in the class, we might have tied. But also in that class was David Dinkins, the mayor of New York. A little later came along Doug Wilder of Virginia. But there was absolutely no way that any of us could have imagined all of the things that were going to happen to us in our lifetime. In fact, Dave Dinkins looked at us like we were crazy when we said we were going back south. Now he wished he'd come south. But just as there was no way for us to imagine all that could have happened in our lifetime, there's no way. You take your wildest dreams and ideals and spell them out now, and I guarantee you the economy and the world is going to do better than that in the next 25 years. There's a scripture passage that I remind myself all the time. I think it's the 21st chapter of Luke. And it talks about all of the famines and pestilence and plagues and earthquakes. And I was in California and I was thinking about the riots and the earthquakes and all of the AIDS epidemic and drugs and everything. And I thought of that passage, but it says, when these things shall come to pass, look up, raise your head, for your redemption is near at hand. I think the struggles of our past, I think the challenges of our present are such that it's easy to look at all that's wrong, but it's also possible to look up and raise your head and to realize that our redemption is near at hand.